And we return to the work of avid Valve stalkers Monolith Productions in their sequel to the sought-after game, First Encounter Assault Recon. After the expansions that looked to be advancing the plot of the original game, Monolith had the perfect opportunity to jump off from the end of Extraction Point, which pits main character Point Man against the entirety of the Alma-corrupted city of Whereverville, and the revived ghost of Paxton Fettle. It was gonna be an all-out war between the last surviving F.E.A.R member and the entire town. Guess what the first thing that happened in the sequel was? Booting out the entire storyline and beginning with an entirely new protagonist, Sergeant Beckett. He's another straight-laced, tough guy, silent protagonist, white dude, so you can easily disregard him entirely for being boring. Yep, just like Perseus' Mandate, it's a story of an entirely different F.E.A.R group being sent into the destabilized town without a name to, well, honestly, they basically stand around waiting for something to happen so they can justify the ridiculous military budget they wear on their backs. I will say that it's fair enough they were called in, because from my experience in playing the game, it seems like they mainly spend all their time getting caught in firefights between replica soldiers and Armacam security dudes as the entire city of Whereverville gets turned into what I suppose Monolith wanted to call World War II crossed with the other world of Silent Hill, which mainly consists of ruined corridors colored strange shades of yellow for no adequately explored reason. I'm sure that all these wonderfully vibrant locales that you spend the time shooting faceless dudes all the do-nothing day are perfect advertisements for the obvious multiplayer mode included on the disc, for those of you who care about that type of thing. But on the other hand, this is the exact same problem as the original F.E.A.R, with the only saving grace of the level design being that it's incredibly linear. A straight A to B experience, which would be fine if the game was selling itself as a COD competitor, yet F.E.A.R wants the audience to take it seriously as a horror game. That was the whole point behind all those phone messages Point Man took down from the last game. Monolith should understand that people didn't come to F.E.A.R to shoot people and be a badass power fantasy. That's totally untrue due to the game still having a health bar mechanic and quote-unquote limited resources. They came to F.E.A.R for the horror. Unfortunately, that gets woefully backseated in a title that should have made it the forefront of the entire experience, since Alma's out and about and ready to do anything she goddamn wants. And even with the full force of her power now unleashed on Townsendburg, F.E.A.R 2 is mainly a minion murder simulator. You go to one area and shoot some dudes, which lets you move forward to another wave of dudes, and then you move on to the next level where some more dudes are waiting for you, and then halfway through you're given a power armor suit to rock around in just to step on and splatter some of the more same damn dudes. I can't believe the game that inspired Monolith during their second chance from Warner Brothers of all publishers was the humdrum expansion Perseus Mandate, because that's what F.E.A.R 2 feels like. Perseus Mandate 2, The Reckoning. However, it wouldn't be fair to mention that Monolith has kept the promise somewhat to combine horror elements with a first-person shooter. Alma is definitely unleashed on the poor, unsuspecting folk of Whereverville, except it seems like literally 100% of the civilians have been butchered by the nuclear explosion before anything happened, but that honestly doesn't matter. The problem with the horror is that unlike the original game, which had segments of the game sectioned out to be horror-specific and allowed the game to try and tell the backstory behind Alma and the Armacam Corporation, and why all of this nonsense was happening in the first place, F.E.A.R 2 instead decides to just bake the horror directly into the first-person shooting, which worked horribly on Monolith's part. Most of the times, the horror sections of the game are either Alma's naked ass jumping on Beckett and trying to molest him only to be fought off with the same QuickTime event repeated over and over again, and the other times you're fighting invisible ghosts who constantly respawn, so it just becomes aggravating instead of terrifying, especially since most of those sections occur in amazingly stupidly designed mazes. I was spectacularly disappointed by Project Origin because I expected Monolith to be able to do some great things with the original idea for the entire series. But since all the horror in this game is unconnected jump scares, the game isn't telling a story, and the shooting of 2,000 faceless dudes isn't going to get them invested. Monolith wasn't focusing on the right aspects of this game because it would have had a chance to be interesting if it had focused on Genevieve, that character from the original F.E.A.R, who was on the deciding end of the whole nuke Whereverville plan, who is now revealed to be the president of Armacam fighting with its board of directors. And by fighting, I mean that the board has put out a hit on her life. Man, they don't even do that when their stock dips 20 points, but will lose one little girl and suddenly all hell breaks loose. Her idea in the aftermath is to somehow capture Alma and use her to bargain for her life or save the town without a name, and the only one who's alive and sane enough to help her is some rando dude named Snake Fist. Kind of like Deep Throat from Metal Gear Solid, except much stupider. And thankfully he's not Norton Mapes, who seems to have thankfully died from the series at this point. It's time to fess up. Most of this game is spent shooting faceless goons and looking around to find Snake Fist from Armacam assassins. That's the whole thing. I can't remember a time before when I was so paralyzed of boredom with a video game. It's just shooting dudes the entire run with nothing to break it up. I mean, even Call of Duty and Battlefield don't do something that completely stupid. That's why the horror in the original F.E.A.R was the good stuff. It broke up the shooting, but since the horror in F.E.A.R 2 are 30-second vignettes, it feels like a Call of Duty wannabe game with better wallpaper. This game even has an antagonist who manages to kick the bucket a bit after the halfway point, and that's great for me because his character was awful. His voice actor didn't even seem to give a shit, or just didn't have the chops for the job.
This abomination was supposed to become one of the commanders. Started off as a regular Joe like you or me. The problem is, the process of turning somebody into a viable commander takes a bit of toll.
On the other hand, Snake Fist was a great casting choice. We find him a bit after General Assface's murder, and his name is actually Terry. He's your stereotypically nerdy scientist character. Gets shit on by Genevieve because she's the president of Armacam and steeped in utter lack of self-awareness. He has all the numbers and all the cool gadgets, and he's even got hippie hair. The problem is that this great character gets murdered 2 minutes into his reveal by a random ninja. Yep, the ninjas are back, and they are still the invisible assholes you remember from that other game. As you could expect, the game doesn't come with a lot of new stuff. They brought in the rabid human enemies, and that's pretty much it. The rabid humans are failed results of the Harbinger project, or the Perseus project, where they were trying to develop new ways of getting psychic commanders on the payroll. Most of them turned into raving lunatic monsters after their abilities were awakened, and Armacam kept them involved because they liked to poke them with sticks, and or throw popcorn at them. I was surprised because besides being bereft of pretty much any worthwhile content, the game is also ludicrously short. The world's falling to crap, Genevieve needs Alma to survive herself. We find out that the Harbinger project was being run out of an elementary school that apparently not one of the parents filed complaints against their child turning into insidious powered psychic people, or plain just going missing, and this project was one in which the protagonist was involved in, and he got the highest marks. It was a good thing that they didn't select Lara Croft off this team for the project. Can't imagine what her games would be like if she had telekinesis. Seriously, did Monolith somehow kidnap her from a Tomb Raider Legend shooting or something? The game ends on Still Island, the place where they were activating the psychic commanders and messing with Alma for more projects and knocking her up constantly. Alma has decided to crash on this deserted island because reasons, and Sergeant Beckett needs to get inside the facility for a psychic amplifier that will allow the protagonist to destroy the psychic ghost of Alma in a one-on-one psychic duel. This plan doesn't go very well since Genevieve tries to hijack the process to get to Alma, which results in both boring people getting typical murdered by the horror monster, and then a bizarre segment where Beckett fights off his dead comrades in some sort of mindscape trying to turn on the amplifier to fight off Alma, while what I can only describe as Alma's psychic ghost having sex with Beckett in the machine in order to create another psychic commander from his overpowered boys. It's odd because from what Terry has said repeatedly, Alma died inside of the vault under Armacam from the first game. So the Alma that exists in this machine and in this entire sequel seems to be a manifestation of her leftover psychic powers. She doesn't seem to physically be there unless her power has possessed her corpse for some reason. Maybe sentimental ones, I don't really know. Then the game just flat ends like the end of Halo 2. I was completely in shock because F.E.A.R in the last 3 games at least had some sort of section that felt like it was ending and not just slap the black screen while they're on the top of the Intrigue Mountain. Although I will say it was a relief because I was sick and tired and dying of interest thirst to no longer shoot faceless dudes about an hour ago. I'll keep this short. F.E.A.R 2 is a typical underwhelming sequel coming from a second chance that Warner Bros. Gave Monolith after Sierra stopped caring. It's a shame to see this happen because the original F.E.A.R and its expansions had a ton of potential if they were working out the issues and balancing the horror with the shooting. But in the effort to go all in on the shooting aspect, the game lost what made it special in order to retain the same great AI design for the enemies, except that if you let the game run at actual speed, I can barely tell if the enemies are supposed to be animating like that, or the models are just glitching into the cover and Monolith is just trying to mask that fact. The game also feels uncomfortable to play, since it seems like Monolith tried to create quote-unquote relatable mechanics to put the player in the protagonist's shoes, by having movement feel realistically off. And I mean like really off. Like putting a second delay on everything you do because your character is wearing 50 pounds of gear in his shoes. Sorry this is taking a bit long. The thing is that F.E.A.R 2 is a Call of Duty wannabe outdone by its competition, with its unique selling point being reduced to jump scares and QTE sections. It's thankfully short, maybe 6 hours if you're good at it, for how underwhelming it is, and in spite of all the things that Monolith screwed up, they somehow managed to convince Warner Bros. On giving them a chance at story DLC, to which we'll be seeing to next week. Anyway, I've said my bit about this game, and I'll leave with this final scoreboard. And a victory for gamers, salute. See you guys next time.